Welcome to the Evoke cast. I'm Dave Thompson, your host this week. Climbing has a way of calling to us, pulling at the edges of our limits, whispering both challenge and possibility. Mountains stand as ancient sentinels, testing those who dare to climb their heights. We all know that the challenge isn't just the mountain itself, but the body's own relentless demands. Today we meet someone who knows that in an uncommon way. Our guest is Luis Freitas, a mountaineer and alpinist who has stood atop Europe's highest peak, Mount Elbrus, and pushed to the extreme altitudes of Aconcagua, coming just shy of its summit. But his greatest feat? Doing it all while managing type 1 diabetes, a condition that never takes a break and adds huge complications to existing in the thin, freezing air of the high peaks. Through discipline, adaptation, and an unbreakable will, he's redefining what's possible for climbers with diabetes. How does he prepare for the unpredictable? What does it take to fuel the body when every calorie, every insulin dose, every moment matters? And what has the mountain taught him? Not just about endurance, but about himself. Join us for a conversation about risk, resilience, and the pursuit of the summit with Luis Freitas. Hi, Luis. I guess to get started, what got you into high altitude mountaineering and alpinism?
Think that's a really good question. I think initially for me it was the challenge, and obviously being type 1 diabetic, the challenge was even bigger than the common challenge. And throughout my life, I made choices that I've always chosen to go for what's more challenging. So when I found that sport that takes you to the edge, where you can challenge your body, you can challenge your mind, that was just a combination of everything that I loved. So also including a bit of a discovery because being type 1 diabetic and going to these places, you learn a lot. It's not information that is readily out there. So it's a combination of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. How has it affected your approach? So when you compare, for instance, like your partners who may not have type 1 diabetes, what are some of the major differences that you notice?
That's a great point. I think that the first thing as a type 1 diabetic that you need to go through when you're going to these places and when you're doing these sports that are at the edge is that you need to have acceptance because you are different. Your journey will be different. And as humans, we tend to compare ourselves to others. And the comparison is not always the best because you are different. So as soon as you accept, that's the first step. Then you need to understand that everything is different. So when you see people pushing their limits, that'll be very different for you as a type 1 diabetic. And it's a combination of knowledge that you need to acquire. But I think that the first step is understanding nutrition and a little bit of your body's physiology or the way your body works, and that will really help you make these decisions that will make it easier for you to go out there.
Right. And so just for maybe people who don't understand what the constraints are for someone with any form of diabetes versus a person who doesn't have that complication, what is it exactly that that you're trying to control and how does that feel like in the moment, you could say?
Yeah, I'll tell you, and I'll give you an example because I think examples are great to understand. So, being type 1 diabetic means your pancreas doesn't produce the insulin. And the insulin is the hormone that regulates how much sugar is in your bloodstream. So basically, you're doing that job. So you're full time thinking and working like a pancreas. That means you need to feel your body to the demands of what you're doing. So if you're exercising, you need to fuel to those demands. Your body also doesn't produce glucagon, which means if you are exercising, you need to eat proportionally. So one example, for instance, as a non-diabetic, if you go for a 1 hour run, most people won't need to eat for that 1 hour run. Whereas if you're a type 1 diabetic, you're most certainly going to have to eat. If you are running for 1 hour and you're not eating, it's either because you started off with too much sugar in your body, which hinders your performance, or it will mean that you're going to faint.
Mm.
So those are the extremes. Um, that's very clear for people when they go for a marathon, because that's where you're pushing your body to the limit, and you need to fuel because your body can't do that for that period that is so long. But for a type 1 diabetic, that's very micro. That happens in 1 hour, maybe 40 minutes. It obviously depends on the intensity of the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about endurance sports and mountaineering, we're definitely talking about more than 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it becomes very crucial to understand the nutrition. And I'll give you an example and a little learning that I had throughout the years. So I would go for a hike in the early days, and what people don't tell you about fueling is that the fuel actually very matters a lot. It's not just getting sugar or carbs, it's the type of sugar and carbs that matters. So I'll go for a hike, and what I'll do is I'll take lunch and I'll take some form of sugar. And I loved cookies when I was younger, really liked them. I came from Brazil, so in Brazil you can't just buy cookies on a bakery. Maybe nowadays you can, but when I moved to Europe, I'll just buy cookies, and I loved it. The thing about cookies is that it has a lot of fat. So I
Mm-hmm.
would go out because I wasn't very fit. The demand of the exercise hiking was very high. What happens? Your glucose or the amount of blood in your sugar starts to drop. To avoid fainting, you need to eat. So I would have the cookies, and I wouldn't see my blood sugar going up, and I'll get angry, frustrated, and I wouldn't understand. I've come to realize that with the intensity that I was having, all the blood was going to the muscles, and digestion was actually slowing down. So
Uh-huh.
I was eating sugar, but that wasn't reaching my bloodstream. So this is just one little complexity that we have to face in the nutrition and in the fueling, that the type of sugar matters. If you're eating a sugar with a lot of fat, that will mean that it will take a long, long time for that to digest.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that throughout the years, but that's just a little thing that you need to consider when you're type 1 diabetic. In reality, there's 42 factors that affect your blood sugar when you're out there. Just some are temperature, the sugar that we're talking about, how much sleep you had on the previous night. Um, Altitude is a factor that affects your blood sugar, your mood. There's many, many factors.
Right. Well, so yeah, maybe this would be a good time to talk about your experiences on Aconcagua. Just for a little bit of context, Luis and I have worked through a number of training plans through probably it's been about maybe a year now. One of those he followed, we worked together and he summited Elbrus. Then a while later, we got back into contact, and he had this very ambitious goal of climbing Aconcagua without a guide, all while having to manage type 1 diabetes. We did a number of things. We did some things that we can maybe get into later, such as heat training, did some blood monitoring and various other things, and for us to get some idea of whether or not the training that we were doing was having a positive or a negative effect. But yeah, just maybe given what you were just saying about the all of the complexities of your nutrition and whatnot. Like, what was your experience like on Aconcagua?
Yeah, so I've been to Aconcagua twice, and I think that the experience was very different because the first time that I was there, I developed HAPE. So that was very early on in the expedition. I was under a guided expedition in a group, and I was feeling the altitude for sure. I was very sick. So that was one of the things that led me to go and find you guys and go for a training plan because I wanted to go back and be better prepared. But what I found with altitude and diabetes, and I should say this maybe now or before that, just a disclaimer that none of this is health advice. If you are diabetic, please search a doctor for health advice. But what I find with altitude is that when I start getting altitude sick, my insulin stops working. So my experience in the first time in Aconcagua when I had HAPE was that I was having to take maybe 4 or 5 times the amount of insulin that I usually take. Now, what does that mean, right? Because maybe people are wondering, well, that's fine, take 5 times more. Well, if I wake up here at sea level and I take 5 times more the amount of insulin that I usually take, I kill myself. It literally leads to death. So to navigate those decisions in altitude is a very hard task. It's very difficult to have the confidence and to trust yourself to make that decision. Obviously, it doesn't happen immediately. You're not deciding in 1 second to take 5 times more. And that's where I think the biggest quality for a diabetic that's trying to do high altitude mountaineering would be to be adaptive. So every day is different. You need to read what's happening, you need to understand what's happening, and you need to adapt. So this experience in Aconcagua after the training was way, way better. So first of all, the heat training definitely helped. I felt way more acclimatized to the altitude. So just in comparison, on the first time when I reached base camp, which is at 4,500 meters, I had this cracking headache and I couldn't sleep. And that was basically what happened for 4 or 5 days. Whereas this time I was tired, but I was fine. And one key thing that I took from the training as well is that I wasn't sore at all during the trip. There was no day that I woke up and I had soreness in my muscles. That's definitely all the training we did. And that's definitely a success that we had. But well, the difference was this time my body was adapting quicker. I was unguided. I was completely solo, and I wanted to do that so that I could learn more about my diabetes and I could learn more about the decision making in the mountains, which was very useful. Um, so having reached base camp, I was still okay. I didn't have a headache. I was feeling fine. Obviously, you're at altitude, you're not sleeping great. So that's where you start to see the impact in the diabetes. You're not sleeping great, your body's stressed, and that stress makes that so that the insulin doesn't work as it should. It basically loses its power. We call that insulin resistance. It's well researched out there that it can happen. And where I say that this is not health advice is because we're all unique. We have people that don't experience that, but I do experience that to the extreme. So my decisions were very adaptive because everything was changing every day. I was going from taking 2 times more insulin to 3 times, to 4 times, to 5 times, as I was realizing that it wasn't working as it should. But the whole experience was incredible, and I learned a lot about my diabetes and about the mountains. Um, I still think that, it was challenging. I spent 4 nights at 5,500 meters, so Camp 2, which led to a lot of stress in my body. I could feel that things weren't um, perfect. I still didn't have a headache, which is very incredible at that altitude. But realizing that the insulin wasn't working and with everything, I ended up making the decision to go back down after having reached Camp 3, which was 6,000 meters, which I think it was a great decision considering that I was solo. So, to reach that height at 6,000 meters with all of this going on it was incredible. It was such an achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. And y- just in our earlier conversations, after the expedition, it was really apparent how the level of risk you put yourself in. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, is just so people who don't have diabetes can understand like what added factors like there are a lot of things that can kill you in the mountains, and with this added onto it, it really makes the preparation and just like to your point, the understanding of what you're capable of from moment to moment very, very important. I will say with Luis's training preparation, he did more than most people who I've ever coached for a high altitude attempt. And just the work capacity for this guy is pretty incredible. In our preparation, I mentioned earlier that we had done some heat exposure training. We used just sort of some guidelines that other coaches have used to help with performance either at altitude or not at altitude. Luis told me about how his blood work looked when he got back. So there were some interesting things about Luis's blood work when he got back that I was quite surprised to see or to learn about. And Luis, maybe you could give us a breakdown of what you saw in your blood work, and then maybe we can kind of extrapolate on what and why that would be.
Yes, yeah, sure. So I think in terms of timeline, I took 3 blood tests. So because we were trying this new method of trying to pre-acclimatize with heat training, and essentially what you're looking for from heat training is an increase in plasma, I believe, and some red blood cell production. I wanted to see if I would see those changes in my blood work. So I took a blood test before the heat training. I took a blood test after, which was right before the expedition, and I took a blood test right after the expedition. So what we saw is the first blood test, and I think I can explain the values, but the first blood test was very much on the higher range of the red blood cell count. I think it goes up to 496 or something like that. I might be mistaken. It was like something like 490, right? The second one was close to that, maybe 470. I can't remember exactly. But what surprised me was that the blood work after the expedition, and that was one day after I came back, I took that blood test. There was a 20% increase in blood red cell count.
Wow.
So that was massive, right? It's not even even when you take mountains like Everest, people spend 3 months at altitude, you see 10, 15%. So
Right.
20%. Because my exposure in Aconcagua was what, 12 days? It was
Yeah,
very,
that's the surprising part about it, is how little time you were at altitude.
well, I should say that I did spend 2 weeks in Argentina before at 2,000 meters. So there
Hmm.
was some exposure, but not to the degree that you generate that response, right? That
Right.
compensation. The other point that we see in the blood test is that, and now I might be saying a few things wrong, so you can correct me, but my understanding from the blood test was that um, the blood cells, they weren't in the correct shape. So
Mm-hmm.
it gives you a percentage of left and right side, I believe, like a ratio, and the ratio wasn't 50-50, which
Mm-hmm.
meant that they were deformed. So upon researching, my understanding is that that happened because of the nutrition during the expedition. So linking back to what I said, because I was experiencing so much insulin resistance in the mountain, I wasn't able to eat a lot. And that's something that people struggle with normally, and they can't eat because they don't have appetite. I did have appetite. I wanted to eat, but my blood sugar was always high. So if I eat with a high blood sugar, I'm risking having a coma there. So I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do that, which meant I was getting 800, 1,000 calories a day in, and having my resting heart rate at 110. I was probably burning 5, 6,000 there, just guessing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so the nutrition wasn't perfect, which meant that the red blood cells that were newly created, they were deformed. But they were still being made, which is, 20% is insane.
Yeah. Yeah. That's above and beyond what I would have ever expected. And I mentioned this on another call that we had, but I really think that there's some exploration that high altitude scientists could do with heat training and or using an altitude tent in preparation, different combinations of those things, figure out are there better or worse ways to optimize people coming from low altitude to these expeditions and having them best place to do the climbs in as short of amount of time as possible. And that's just a lot easier on the body if you don't have to spend months somewhere as even if you don't have diabetes, your body's just deteriorating the whole time.
Yes,
But
that's what I saw. So when I started my expedition, there were, I think, three other people starting at the same day. They were all unguided as well. So, we talked and we would have meals together. And the common thing across all of them was that first, I would be the first to start every morning and the last to finish because I didn't want to stress my body too
hmm
much. I know the altitude's already stress, right? If you add the physical stress, you're done.
hmm
So they're always passing me every day, and they didn't do any preparation in terms of heat or anything else. They all ended up getting sick and not even starting the summit attempt. So they stayed at base camp, basically.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's a testament for your preparation, that's for sure. One thing that can happen is people will ascend too quickly, particularly if they're in really good shape. They're very fit. They're like, okay, I want to go, and you're running the real risk of getting some form of altitude sickness if you do that. And when you're talking about these far-flung expeditions, that is a very expensive mistake if you're hoping to summit someday. So,
It is in
um,
terms of time and money.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think and maybe I'm going off track here, but one of the things that training taught me as well, because before training, one of the questions I had in my mind for these events was, can I do it? Right? There's this question of, can I do it? After the training, that question changed to, how am I doing it? In which
hmm
way? How am I going to be when I'm back?
hmm
It's not how am I going to be when I reach the top, right? Because there was no question that I could do it. There was no question I could reach base camp. There was no question I could reach camp one, two, three. It was about in which way I was reaching it. Was I healthy? Was my diabetes controlled? Was it could I replicate that in the future?
Hmm. Yeah. That actually leads me to another question. So it sounds like you maybe learned what you were hoping to learn from trying something like Aconcagua. What do you see as something you'd be interested in pursuing in the future, like peaks or rock routes? I know you have a varied interest list in, of things that we all do in the mountains. So yeah, what do you see as something you'd be want to doing in the future here?
Absolutely. I think that, I always love the mountains. So throughout these years, any opportunity to get out, I'll take it in any form. Was it climbing? Was it mountaineering? Was it slacklining? Was it anything? I just like to be out there. And one thing that I noticed is that I have a preference of how to get out. And one of my biggest preferences is climbing. I've always seen myself as a very good technical climber, and that was the sport that I fell in love with, and that was the first way that I found to get out. And pursuing high altitude, you go to mountains like Aconcagua, and people say you're going to climb Aconcagua. Yes, you're climbing Aconcagua. Most of it is walking, right?
Hmm.
The technical aspect of it is very small or non-existent. So I think that, I have skills that I can use in different ways and in different mountains, and that's what I want to pursue in the future. I do still think that, Aconcagua is a great mountain. It's very accessible in terms of the height. It's probably one of the best at that 7,000-meter mark. And the structure is very good. So I still see that mountain as a great place to go. But I also want to enjoy the technical aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a big question, when you're thinking about technical terrain where you find yourself in a lot of situations where you can't fall or where you can't mess up. Um, Having diabetes only complicates that. And so, firstly, kudos to you for being willing to try and or do these technical things that are challenging for people who do not have the constraint of constantly having to manage their blood sugar. I guess I would ask, how do you see in those types of situations your management of diabetes, if you're on the Eiger or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that having diabetes actually prepares you for these situations that are very strenuous or, very high focus, very high risk, where you're in a no fall zone, let's say. Because day to day you are making these decisions, and you're having dinner as type 1 diabetic, you're taking insulin. If you take a little bit more than you should, you're risking uh, fainting. So you are dealing with risk a lot more. So I think that for me, that brought me peace of mind in these situations. So I deal very well with the stress and with the risk. I remain calm and I can deal with that. So I think that that's a very good thing from the diabetes. But when we're talking about these terrains where, when I go ice climbing, for instance, right, very technical, no fall, the management needs to be the best. So the focus needs to be 100% so that the management is good, so that you don't have to deal with an extra situation of having a low glucose, let's say, which
Hmm.
is what leads to fainting, or having a high glucose, which hinders your performance and can lead to a coma as well. So the preparation for these events is very, very key. How can you get better at that training? because day to day you are doing that preparation. If you're training 3 4 hours on end, which was what I was doing before Aconcagua, I was having to do that because if I have to stop every day my training to treat a low blood glucose, I'm not going to train,
Hmm.
or my time won't be efficiently used. So I had to nail down that preparation very well, understand my body very well, so that I can go 4 6 8 hours without having to worry about the diabetes. Obviously, you're still thinking about it and you're still proactively managing it. As I said, any event above half an hour, 40 minutes, you need to refuel. But
Hmm.
if you're doing that every day, it becomes routine. It becomes something that you know how to do. So when you're going for the Eiger or when you're going for ice climbing, you already know exactly how much sugar you need at what time. And what you do is just verify that, that assumption that you know what you're doing is correct. So that's how I see the management. And I think that I've only been able to reach that point because I've always questioned and I've always tried to understand what's going on.
Hmm.
So when I was eating that cookie back in the day and I was getting a low blood glucose and I had to tell everyone in my group, guys, I need to stop because I'm gonna faint, I hated it. But I didn't stop doing it because I hated that situation. I understood that I hated what was happening there, but not the sport.
Hmm.
So I wanted to understand how can I make this better so that I can enjoy the sport, right? And I think that that's where the adaptiveness comes, um, to go and look and try to understand, why is this happening? There must be a reason.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think with just how inquisitive you are and the way that you've approached it, other people who, whether they have like type 1 or type 2 diabetes, obviously they have to figure out their own individual ways and methods and things like that. But I would hope and assume that they could take a lot away from this, just as people who are just trying to get out into the outdoors and have a great experience doing it, or as good of an experience as they can.
Absolutely. And that's the end goal because, when I went out all those times and I had these problems where I had to stop and I had to tell the group stop, I don't want other people to go through that because I've learned how other people can learn how as well. So pushing the extreme and going solo on a 7,000-meter peak, that's for me to learn so that I can pass that on so that other people can do it without suffering as much. Um, my dream is for a group of diabetics to do that together, and they all know what they're doing. They're all passing on the knowledge. So the end goal is to go through all that experience, which I'm still starting. It's a long journey. I'm not in a rush. I'm still learning a lot, and hopefully in the future write a book and transmit that knowledge to other people. But I remain open if people want to contact me to talk about it.
Great. Okay, so we will share Luis's Instagram handle in the show notes here. So, Luis, what's next for you? What would your future climbing resume look like 10 years down the road?
10 years. Wow. That is a long time. I hope that it will be a long resume, but I have a short-term plan for this year and maybe for the next 5 years. So I think that next, I'm gonna focus on doing at least some or all of the 4,000-meter peaks in the Alps. I think that they are a combination of everything that we talked about in terms of altitude, their technical terrain. So they're a great combination of what I love. And probably once or twice a year, I'll go on a long expedition as well. So I'm already looking at the next uh, peak that I want to climb. I think that, as I said, the first step towards all of this is acceptance. And I think that for me, the experience is very important. The journey is very important, and learning from the journey is important. So for me, the plan is to go and enjoy, go and learn about it, learn about the management, not really summit something.
Hmm.
So my next plan is to go to Kyrgyzstan. I'm not going to tell you which peak, because if I tell you which peak, it means I'm going to climb that peak and trying to summit that peak, and that's not the intention, right? I
Hmm.
want to go and climb in Kyrgyzstan and enjoy
Right.
and learn a lot from it.
Well, yeah, that's very inspiring. And, on my end, it's been great to follow along on this journey with you and help you where I can. And yeah, I'm just really glad we could spotlight you and talk about your unique situation because I really think whether or not you have diabetes, like you can learn a lot about a basic physiology by understanding how diabetes affects physiology. It's one of the first things that you learn about in physiology class. Just if you're a student of training and performance, it really behooves you to at least have a basic understanding of what fueling is. And with diabetes, fueling is life or death in ways that it's not for folks who do not have diabetes. Um, so yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, those are all the questions and topics that I had. Is there anything you'd like to close with?
No, no, I just like to really thank you for, all the training plans and all the interactions we had so far. I think that the work that you guys do is great. I think that we really pushed the limit last year. I think it
We
was
did.
very much on the edge, accumulated about 1,000 hours of training. And the results were incredible, really. I think that everyone should not everyone, but whoever has access should try it because um, it's incredible. It's a very nice journey.
Well, yeah, thank you. And it's wonderful to hear you say that. And like I said earlier, you're a beast, so you can handle that level of training. And when we think about our bodies and like what they're capable of, it's good to wax and wane with the level of pushing that you can do in a training plan or whatever. It's also good to kind of pull back and enjoy a new baseline for a while and then go off of that baseline. And what I think some people who are newer to this don't understand is you can't just go and break ground all the time. But when you think about like what your new baseline is, that is what's sustainable and actually quite easy is often an incredible amount of work of yourself a year, 2 years, 5 years prior to that. And so just having that perspective, I think, makes it more of a lifelong pursuit, so to speak. And
Absolutely, it's very individual, and uh, I think that it's a self-awareness journey as well to get to know your limit, what is challenging for you, and what is not as well.
Mhm.
So I think it's just very valuable to go through that journey, even if it's, as you said, baseline. It's very good.
New baselines. Here's to new baselines. Well, Luis, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. And like we said earlier, we can give Luis's Instagram handle. And if you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes and would like to contact him, that would be the method to do so. But with that, thank you for joining Luis and I here at the Evoke Cast. We're here to disseminate all sorts of information about performing better in the mountains. So thank you, and we're signing off.